Welcome to the Calling the Quarters podcast. I'm your host, Dean Jones. Today I'm talking with author Jamie Waggoner, who is a pagan priestess, philosopher, author, and teacher with 25 plus years of study and practice. Jamie's work centers around eclectic theurgic and folk magic, mythology, oracular traditions, trance arts, and liminal rites. Jamie has studied esoteric and occult subjects since 1995. She began her priestess path as a member of the Sisterhood of Avalon, and she now uses her skills, empathy, and experience to lead independent workshops, rituals, sacred circles, and study programs. Her work as a priestess is highlighted in the Red Tent documentary film and the Goddess of Earth Oracle. When she's not teaching or facilitating, Jamie is writing. Most recently, her essays have been featured in anthologies such as The Host of Many, Hades and His Retinue, The Feminine Macabre, and her first full-length nonfiction book, Hades, Myth, Magic, and Modern Devotion, is forthcoming from Llewellyn worldwide in February 2024. I now want to take you to my conversation with author, priestess of Hades, Jamie Waggoner. Welcome to the Calling of the Quarters podcast. Today I'm speaking with Jamie Waggoner, author of the upcoming book, Hades, Myth, Magic, and Modern Devotion, that will be out in 2024. Jamie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Dean. I'm so happy to be here today.
I'm happy to have you. Now, for our listeners not familiar with your work, can you talk about where you're from and where you live now?
Oh my goodness, I have lived many places. I was born in Missouri, in mid-Missouri, and did a majority of my growing up there. But in my teenage years, my family moved to Oregon. So I finished out my high school years in Oregon. I went to college in northern Idaho. And immediately after college, I got married and we moved. And my husband and I, first we were in Atlanta, Georgia for a number of years, and then Austin, Texas, and now we live in Auburn, Alabama. So I'm a
Wow,
Southern transplant, and I actually really love it down here in the South.
nice. Well, you have been all over. What part of Idaho were you in?
I went to college at the University of Idaho in Moscow, Idaho. So it's
Nice.
yeah, it's about an hour and a half from Spokane, Washington, if you're familiar with that area. Yeah.
Yeah, I used to actually live. I'm in my high school years. We lived in the middle part of it, up near Spokane, and we lived in little towns all over the place. I lived in Idaho too, in Rathdrum, if you've ever heard of that, next to Coeur d'Alene,
Yeah.
and in Lewiston.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
worked.
It was
I worked at
actually
Taco
really
Time.
great. You worked at Taco Time. That's definitely a Pacific Northwest kind of
Yeah.
thing. No, it was great. It was a great little town to go to college. Had a really good experience there. And it's beautiful country. I don't think people realize how beautiful Idaho is.
No, it is nice, and that town's really lovely. We would kind of go there for any kind of culture.
Mhm.
If we needed to go like see a play or music or anything or have some decent food, we'd always kind of go there. It was always so nice to visit that town.
Hmm.
Now, so at what point in your life did you come to paganism or witchcraft, whatever you want to call yourself, however you like to title yourself? When was the turning point in your life when you kind of realized this would be a part of your life?
Well, it was in Idaho, actually. It was funny that we were just joking about that. So I went to the University of Idaho. My bachelor's degree is in philosophy. And for my senior project, I was taking a lot of classes on feminism, history of feminism, and feminist philosophy. And we got into sort of the emerging witchcraft and Dianic traditions that were gaining speed at that point in time. This was the late 90s when I was in college. And so academically, I was very interested in it. It was very different from anything that I had ever encountered before. My family is Christian. I grew up in the Christian church, so this was something new to me. And, in studying it, my academic interest sort of blossomed into kind of just falling in love with the idea of a feminine God or more facets to the divine than just what I was hearing about in church. And so, that academic interest rolled on and I read more and more and I studied. And, then I found myself trying to seek out groups and books where I could learn more and I could bring the practice, into my life. So when I graduated college and we moved all the way across the country, it was that fall that I celebrated my first ritual. It was loosely based on like a Wiccan type of ritual. I think I got it out of a Scott Cunningham book, probably. And it was beautiful. It was just a solo little ritual. And, I've been on this path ever since. And I most of the time I identify as being a priestess because I really feel like I serve gods. And to me, being a priestess is being in service. I certainly do practice magic. I teach others how to use magic, and that's definitely part of my spirituality. But I think I identify more as a priestess than a witch. So yeah.
Good. Yeah. Yeah, we talk about that a lot on the show, and I think some people have definite definitions or not, I think is the case maybe. So it's always interesting to hear how people kind of talk about themselves in that context, because it's different for every guest, and it's kind of neat to see what that is. Now, you kind of discovered paganism, when you were in Idaho, and you've lived in other parts of the United States and have been kind of an open pagan. Have you had any difficulty or experienced any kind of hardships because you were openly pagan and kind of had some, difficulties sometimes? I know that Moscow is kind of nice, but like the neighboring areas where I lived, it wasn't easy. I was harassed sometimes. I wasn't able to get jobs because I was very openly pagan.
Yeah. I would say for the first, probably 10, 12 years that I was practicing pagan, I was very quiet about it. That's when I lived in
Yeah,
Atlanta and I had a corporate job.
yeah,
And I was in marketing, have a background in marketing and graphic design. And, I just kind of kept that part of my life very separate. And,
yeah,
definitely the internet was a thing, and like social media was kind of coming online. Like Facebook was, people were on MySpace before they were on Facebook and all this kind of stuff. So,
yeah,
online it was a little bit different. I think that now it's a little bit harder to remain in the broom closet, so to speak.
yeah,
Um, but, I I just sort of little by little, especially when I moved to Austin and I no longer had to keep that corporate job, I think I was able to kind of talk about it a little bit more and kind of live it out loud a little bit more. And I never made like a big official announcement.
right.
I just kind of didn't censor myself anymore. And then if people asked me direct questions about it, I was just truthful and transparent. So, and Austin is a weird town. So there
Yep.
were no
Keep Austin
problems
weird.
there. Yeah, no problems there whatsoever. I was certainly by no means the weirdest person in Austin.
Yeah,
Um, and then when we moved here to Alabama, I mean, it's interesting. I it's a college town. Auburn is a
yeah,
college town. So, it's a little bit more liberal than other parts of the state. And I kind of do the same thing. In the community here, I'm known as the tarot lady, which is pretty funny. I'm sure there are other tarot readers in Auburn,
yeah.
Alabama, but I'm the only one that does it in public. And so, I'll be walking in the grocery store and I'll see somebody and they'll go, "Oh, hey, tarot lady, hey," which, is, I mean, I think it's delightful. So far, I've not had any negative experiences, and I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah,
And, I do a lot of protection on my house, myself, my family, using all those magical tools that I have to try to bolster that. So, I don't know. It could be that I'm gonna run into some stuff in the future. I was joking around with my husband about having a book coming out about Hades that's going to be, everywhere that books are sold. It's gonna be on Amazon. I'm like, do you think that I'll get people leaving comments about how I'm, trying to further the further like the gospel of the devil? And he cracked me up because he said, "Well, if you don't get one or two of those, you're probably not doing it right."
it's a good point.
So, yeah, yeah. So we'll see. We'll see how things go in the future.
Can you talk about your time with the Sisterhood of Avalon, and tell us about that time and what it meant to you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. The Sisterhood of Avalon is an international Celtic women's mystery tradition. It's an inclusive tradition, so anyone who identifies as a woman is welcome there. Um, It's founded by a woman named Jenna Talendrew, and who has wrote several books. You can check out the books, Avalon Within, and I think there's a couple sequels to that that talk about the basics of the tradition. It's, in a lot of ways, I think it's similar to some of the Druidic orders that are active today. We primarily focused we focused on cultivating magical skills and healing skills, and worked what we called a cycle of healing that kind of worked with the seasons and worked with some of the pagan high holy days. And we also utilized the mythology of Wales, the mythology that's in the Mabinogion, and worked with the goddesses in that book. So Caradwyn, Bronwyn, Arianrhod, Blodeuwedd, and Rhiannon. Did I say Rhiannon? So yeah, and it was a tradition that, it was very well researched. Jenna is a very good scholar, very meticulous scholar, and it was a good combination of being rooted in the mythology and rooted in history and historical practice, combined with gnosis that's, clearly delineated as gnosis, right? And I just I really loved it. It was a beautiful tradition, and I was in it from 2005 until 2016.
Yeah.
And I think for me, I did like that combination, like I said, because being a scholar, philosopher at heart, that was really important to me. But it also felt very, it was an organization that felt very safe. And for me, that was important, especially coming from a background where there was no discussion of witchcraft or paganism or anything like that as I was growing up. So, as a young person, I wanted to be I wanted to learn and be with others and celebrate rituals with others, but I wanted to do it in a way that felt safe to me, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And the SOA was really, SOA is short for Sisterhood of Avalon. The
Mhm.
SOA was really a place where I could do that and I could grow. And I received a very good foundation as a priestess there.
Nice. Thank you. We already mentioned this a little bit, but I kind of wanted to circle back to it because I know this is oftentimes something that's a really personal topic with a lot of the writers that have been on the program. Who are some of the books that you read? Who are some of the authors that you read back when you were coming up as a pagan, or even beforehand, that might have influenced you, that were kind of special to you?
Yeah. I've read a lot of sort of the second wave feminists that were that were coming
Yeah.
through in the late 90s, like Starhawk, Carol P. Christ, a lot of the folks that were active, Diane Stein, I think, a lot of people that were active during that time. And some of those folks, they've fallen out of favor a little bit. Some, not all, but some, some have gone a little turfy. And so, they
Yeah.
have to be really, when you look at them with a modern eye, you have to critique some of that stuff, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of those feminist texts. And then, I read Scott Cunningham's books, Scott's Wicca books, which were really, really great. And I also, let's see, what else did I read? Oh, a lot of John and Kathleen Matthews, the Matthewses books,
Yeah.
on British spirituality, Irish spirituality, all of that. They have a huge, I'm between the two of them, their library of publications is enormous. So I think those were some of my early influences.
So, what led to you becoming a writer? You've written quite a bit in fiction and in nonfiction publications as well, and we're going to talk about your upcoming book. But where did you find that you were going to follow the writer's path? What was the epiphany there for you?
Ever since I learned how to read, I've wanted to be a writer ever since I was a child. Um, and, you know, it was always an important thing to me. And even when I graduated from college and went into the workforce, I did a lot of copywriting. I've actually been published quite a bit, but it's mostly ads and commercials and copy for catalogs and stuff like that
That
in
counts.
the past. Yeah, yeah. So all that kind of stuff. A million different ways to describe window blinds and ceiling fans and all that stuff. Um, but I've always wanted to be a writer. And one of the things that did keep me going during that period in my life when I wasn't necessarily being spiritually or even entirely creatively fulfilled while working was I would write fiction. I would rewrite all of the stories. Like, I was studying with the Sisterhood of Avalon, so I was studying all the stories in the Mabinogion, and I would creatively rewrite them out into like longer like fiction novels and things like that. And it was a way to connect with that part of myself and to keep it going and to do something that I found fulfilling. And then later, when I moved here to Alabama, most of my writing honestly has been in developing course material for Way of the Weaver, which we can talk about later. It's a
Yeah.
magical training program that I run with a friend of mine named Murphy Robinson. So I've been doing a lot of that kind of stuff, and I decided that I now had the time in my schedule and like the mental availability to be able to actually write down an entire nonfiction book.
Yeah.
So that's how I got around to writing Hades. Before that, my publishing, other than for marketing type of projects, has mostly been in anthologies. There's an organization called Bibliotheca Alexandrina. You might have heard of
Hmm.
that. They do a lot
Yeah.
of anthologies. So I wrote for one of their recent anthologies. It was about Hades. I wrote a piece in there about Hades as a household patron. And then I also was involved in this really cool project that's still going on. You can get these books anywhere that they're sold, called The Feminine Macabre. And there's five volumes of this journal, and it's a journal of the paranormal. And what's
Hmm.
cool about it is all the articles in the journals are written by people who identify as female or as non-binary. So
Right.
a lot of voices that you normally don't hear in the paranormal industry, and it's a very cool project. So I would encourage people to check it out. I wrote an extensive article about the art of scrying.
Oh, nice.
Mhm.
And can we talk about your fiction writing as well?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
So the project that is near and dear to my heart, from the fiction perspective, is a rewrite of the second branch of the Mabinogion, which is called Bronwyn, Daughter of Lear.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, and I really love Bronwyn. In the Mabinogion, which we have to keep in mind is that the Mabinogion was written down by Christian monks in the medieval period from probably much earlier oral storytelling traditions. So you can definitely tell that there's a Christian patriarchal overlay in these
Yeah.
stories. And Bronwyn's story is very powerful. It's a story of being separated from family, treated horribly, and figuring out how to empower yourself to to get yourself rescued out of this situation, to do what you can, and then trying to make peace between warring factions, which ultimately fails. And there's a lot of heartbreak at the end of the story. And it's interesting because a lot of people paint Bronwyn as a victim of circumstances, and think I think her story holds a lot of power, especially for, you know, our world right now, which is not a world that often has happy endings as far
Yeah.
as, current events and issues of justice and things like that. And I think, showing her in a position of power with agency um, is, I think that those lessons are there. And the technique that I take to write fiction is the same technique that I use in nonfiction projects too, because I use trance journey as a technique for writing. So I will go into trance journey, and if I'm, writing about Bronwyn, I'll go and ask to speak with her, and she and I will discuss like what part of the story I'm writing down, and I'll ask her to tell it to me in her own words, like what she would want people to know, especially the people that might be reading it at this day and time. And then I'll come back and write. So that's where, my awen, my inspiration comes from.
Are there any fiction writers that you particularly like?
Oh my gosh, so many. I I am I consume so many books. I probably read at least one, if not two, fiction books a week. I love them so much. Some of my favorite writers these days, really like V.E. Schwab. They wrote
Hmm.
the Shades of Magic series, which
Oh yeah.
is really, really good. Um, kind of jumping on sort of the young adult train. I know a lot of people are on this fan train. I do like Sarah J. Maas and all of her books um, about the Fae realm. I love those. Let me see. Oh my gosh, there's so many.
Yeah, no, it's kind of
um,
a tough question to throw at people, so
yeah.
I apologize.
No, it's okay. I mean, I've not read all of them because I got sidetracked and went sort of into more fantasy. But I used to always be very into the Diana Gabaldon series, the Outlander series. Like before
Oh
it was
yeah,
on Netflix, it was books,
yeah.
right? And like
Yeah.
they started coming out when I was in college, and for a long time, Diana was my idol of who I wanted to be when I grew up, right? And I had the chance to meet her once at a book festival in Atlanta. And of course, like fangirled all over the place and asked for, her signature and took a picture with her with a very cheesy grin on my face. And I have to say, she was very gracious. She was a lovely, lovely person.
I've heard nothing but good things about her from people who are her fans. They just say she's very, very gracious and giving.
I would say so. Yeah.
All right, so I want to talk about your upcoming book, Hades, Myth, Magic, and Modern Devotion. So, what led to you choosing to write about the god Hades, and where did the studies begin here for you?
So I started working with Hades in, okay, well, let's back up. We talked about my first ritual, right? My very first
Right.
ritual in my tiny little apartment. Um, when I did that ritual, I included a trance journey in that ritual, and I left it kind of open-ended. I was going to go to um, this place in the other world that's basically a field, like a big open field that my ancestors tend. And I was just going to go there and see what kind of guide or god entity, who would show up for this very first sort of initiatory thing that I was doing. And the one that showed up was Persephone, honestly,
Hmm.
which was interesting. And I thought it was lovely. And it was a beautiful trance journey. She was very kind. It felt really great to make a connection with her on that night. And it may have been foreshadowing, but I had no idea at that point in time um, how much the underworld would come to mean to me, because for so many years, I worked primarily in a Welsh pantheon. I did not really work with the Greek pantheon. Um, in 2016, I was on a ritual facilitation team for Vermont Witch Camp. And the theme of the camp was Persephone's descent. So they wanted to use the story of Persephone going to the underworld as like the story arc for camp and kind of plan all the workshops and rituals and things like that around it. And on the facilitation team, there were four of us, and we decided that it would be a good idea to each take on kind of one of the primary roles in the story, and then go and do the research and bring that back to the team so that we could help craft ritual and that we could, really sink into those roles. And, I thought they would probably ask me to be Persephone just because of my age and my feminine presentation and everything. But they didn't know. Somebody else wanted that role. And I just waited till the very end to choose, and no one had chosen Hades. So that's who I chose. Honestly, I chose Hades at the time. I remember thinking, well, I really super love working with the energy of Caradwen. I would consider myself, Caradwen is very near and dear to my heart. And I'm like, the energy that most resembles that I'm familiar with is Hades. So I mean, that was kind of the basis behind my choice. And that's where it all started. And the challenging thing was I was trying to do my research, right, for the facilitation team. And there's not a lot out there about Hades. And that was really frustrating to me.
Yeah, I remember that too. Like I remember too that over the years, like if you wanted, there'd always be like an odd Llewellyn book that would have like, a god's name and then like one attribute, which is endlessly frustrating. Because I remember wanting
Mhm.
to do devotions to Hades like years ago, and looking up stuff was very hard to find anything about Hades. It was really a chore to find even their most remote stuff. So I imagine it must have been tough for you to do research.
It was really tough, and, I wanted to, part of my background in training, and this came from the Sisterhood of Babylon, was the idea that layering on correspondences gives you, like, a bigger and bigger magnet almost. So if you're looking to
Yeah.
draw energies to you for magic or for ritual, the more correspondences you can layer, the more powerful that's going to be, the easier it's going to be able to get them. And, with so little out there about Hades, I basically just experimented. To find, like, what incense should I burn for him? What sort of stones align with him? What sort of, herbal things align with him? What colors does he like? And just like I said, in my writing process, I spent a lot of time in trance journey talking to him and asking him about it.
Your work is I want to really let people know that this is a very comprehensive scholarly work as well, as having other facets as well. I'd be hard pressed to like kind of type this book, as a librarian. I hate to do that anyway, but I really liked the scholarship here, and that there
Thank
was a
you.
lot of different facets to the book, which I really liked because I really picked up that from Hades. And you talking about Hades, there's a lot of different facets there, and I think there's been a lot of miscommunication and bad press through the last few decades that I've seen about Hades. What do you think are some of the misunderstandings people have about Hades?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for mentioning the scholarship in the book. I combed through resources, every piece of
Yeah,
art, every scrap of literature, phrase from a play, phrase from an epic poem that I could find, um, to kind of cobble together some of that stuff. Because, going to primary sources is really, really important to me. I think that, we have a foundation in those, and then we can go for the gnosis piece. Um, there's a lot of misconceptions about Hades. I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that he is equivalent with the Christian notion of the devil, and that the
yeah,
underworld is equivalent maybe with the Christian notion of hell. And
yeah,
that's actually sort of a lost in translation mistake that was made in the early days of trying to consolidate the scriptures and the Bible. There are a lot of concepts in ancient Hebrew and ancient Greek that that are similar, but as they got translated and as they became part of Christian tradition, they were really sort of misinterpreted. And so, but if you look at it, if you look at the source texts and you look at the beliefs that people had, Hades and the devil are two completely distinct entities with,
yeah,
different personalities and different purviews. I always say it's two entirely different mythologies, and sometimes they get confused and they get mishmashed. And I think that's the biggest thing. I think the another huge misconception about Hades is that he doesn't really have any involvement or care about the living, that he
yeah.
only cares about the dead, and he only cares about getting more of them for his domain, which is certainly not true. Um, Hades is, even in the ancient world, Hades was definitely involved in the life cycle. We have ancient pieces of art where Hades and Persephone are sitting together as guardians of a harvest and of fertile earth, because, the it speaks to the way that life and death go hand in hand. I mean, things have to die to create soil in which we plant seeds, to grow things to feed ourselves or to feed the animals that we slaughter for food. And so there's this whole cycle of Hades being involved in more than just guarding the underworld. So, I think those are some of the misconceptions. One of the things that I find a little annoying, honestly, when I read about it, is if Hades gets mentioned in magical books, it's more so that either, he can either be the patron of a ritual where you're trying to contact your ancestors, or you can ask him for abundance and money and wealth because that's one of the things that is in his purview. And I oftentimes, I mean, I've never heard him say anything negative about it, but I often ask him, I'm like, so do you get tired of people asking you for money all the time? Because I think that, I think he likes it when people knock on his door for other things.
Oh my God, like kind of like the dad with the wallet, all the kids are coming to.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I need an increase on my allowance. I need an advance, Dad.
How do you think that how do you think that Hades can help people with their lives? Like, why would, if somebody was attracted to Hades, and I felt like I have been, like you mentioned the artwork depicting Hades and Persephone, I was very attracted to the images of Hades with like a sheaf of grain next to Persephone.
Yeah.
That always really drew me. And the
Hmm.
cycle of the harvest season, that I've always really been very drawn to that. What do you think? How do you think that Hades can help somebody who wants to work with him?
Well, I think there's a lot of ways that he can help. Hades is an incredibly protective energy. So if you're encountering situations where you're feeling unsafe, or when you want to call in some guardian type of energy, Hades is incredibly protective. Not so much from a warrior type of standpoint, but more from a grounded, stable, um, centered kind of place. It's like he has such gravitas that he doesn't really need to swing a sword to be intimidating. So, he
Yeah,
can definitely help with that. I think that he can help with having I like, he's called the host of many, polydegmon. It's one of his epithets. And it really refers to him being the host of all the shades of the dead that reside in the underworld. And I think about the fact that no one is ever turned away from the underworld. As long as you have your coin and you can pay Charon to cross the Styx, you're not turned away. Um, and there's this idea of hosting was really important in the ancient Greek world. And hosting was almost a divine responsibility.
yeah.
And, Hades being called the host of many, it takes it to like, an infinite scale of being a host. And, I think he can teach us about how to be good hosts to other people, to be good hosts to ourselves and our own hearts through taking care of ourselves, and also with an existential sense of belonging, like when we're lonely, because we do, if it, we do we belong in the underworld. We belong with Hades. There are no misfits there. So I really love that. I love that about him so much. He has a sense of, for him, time almost moves on a geologic scale. So his perspective on things is very helpful, especially if you're in a spiral of thinking of catastrophe or worry or anxiety or things like that. He can really kind of ground you back down in reality and remind you to just take a deep breath. So there are a lot of things about him that I find very yeah, it's almost like having a home where you're going to be safe and well fed and taken care of. And just knowing that you have that to rely on is I don't know, it's incredible. It's incredible in a world where so many things seem like they're shifting.
I like that. Now, do you have any advice for somebody who wants to devote their worship to Hades?
Yeah, I mean, maybe don't ask him for money right away, right?
Yeah, let's not do
Maybe,
that.
yeah, let's not do that right off the bat. I mean, you can ask him to provide things for you. I have good friends that have stories about him providing things, and he's certainly provided me with some things that I've wanted in unexpected ways that I have not, he just, because we spend a lot of time together, knew that I wanted them, and then they show up, which is really phenomenal. Um, if you want to get started with Hades, I would say get to you need to get to know Hades beyond what we see in like the Disney movies or Hades Town on Broadway or the Lore Olympus webtoon. Like all the Hades and Persephone are so popular. They continue to be popular. They've been popular for millennia. Um, but he's either villainized or romanticized a lot, and he's far more complex than that. And the only way to get to know him is by spending time with him. Maybe going to some of those primary sources, looking at some of the ancient artworks, looking at some of the ancient texts. I think the first thing I always encourage people to do is to start building an altar, because then you've actually made a physical space where you're inviting him to come into your
Yeah.
life. He had, it's like pulling out a chair at your table for him to sit. And I think other than that, just being quiet and listening a little bit to what he might have to say. One of the most basic devotional practices that I have, and I write about this in the book, is saying a prayer or hymn to Hades at sunset, twilight. It's a liminal time, and it's when the sun is setting in the west. And according to mythology and some sources, the realm of the underworld is just beyond the setting sun in the west. And it's a really nice, quiet time. And I like to say a little prayer. I say a prayer that I've written, but you can certainly write your own, or you can go and use the Orphic hymn. There's an Orphic hymn to Pluton. I like the translation that Patrick Dunn did. I think that's a really good translation. And just read it to him as an offering. And I think also I like sometimes, you know, singing the same chant or repeating the same prayer over and over, because over time in that daily practice of it, it starts to sort of unravel and reveal more and more of itself and more meaning. And yeah, I think that that's where I would tell someone to start. Maybe think about building an altar, and maybe think about, saying a little daily prayer.
I like that. Are there any challenges to working with Hades?
Well, yeah.
I mean, I
There
think that would
are.
go with any deity you could really describe,
Yeah,
probably.
yeah, yeah, certainly. But it, there are some unique ones with Hades. I think one of the unique challenges, like I said, he's either villainized or romanticized a lot. And so, when you tell people you work with Hades, even if you tell pagans that you work with Hades, sometimes you get a very averse reaction, like, just kind of a, oh God, don't come near me reaction. And I don't know if that stems from kind of the ancient idea that, there weren't a lot of statues of Hades, or if there were, his head was kind of turned so that it, he was not directly gazing into the eyes of the viewer, because people were afraid to even kind of call in the presence of death, or the Lord of the dead. So it might be that. It might be a very human aversion to death. It could also be a little bit of a Christian hangover. So that stuff is hard. The other thing that's really hard that you're going to have to come to terms with if you want to work with Hades is Persephone and the abduction, and how you handle that, because that is not an easy story. It is not an easy bit of mythology. And, as far as Hades goes, it's the biggest piece of primary source text we have, the Homeric hymn to Demeter, too. And it's the abduction of Persephone. And, I think it's really important to not try to gloss over the violence in that myth. And I think it's also important to understand that, when you've spent time with it and come to terms in it in whatever way is meaningful to you, you cannot expect others to do the same, especially if others have experienced trauma. And, you should always respect their opinions, respect their feelings, and not brush them under the table. So I think that that's something that can definitely be challenging.
What's the biggest takeaway that you want the reader to take from this book after they read it?
Oh my goodness. um,
That's again a tough question. I think I probably asked too many a lot of hard questions.
No, I actually love it. I love being challenged. I'm like, there's so many takeaways. I don't know if I can narrow it down to just one. I think that Hades is the takeaway is that Hades is multifaceted,
Yeah.
and that death is not something that we necessarily need to be scared of.
I like that. I mean, I really am very grateful. I mean, it's nice to see some books on specific deities that are fleshed out, have a lot of complexity to them, because so often we've been giving this like cookie cutter thing, like this god's for love, this god's for intelligence, this god's for, I don't know,
Yeah.
real estate value. I don't know. Like it's like
Yeah,
you
yeah,
have like,
yeah.
and it's just, I kind of like, you're like, okay, that does nothing for me, thanks. And it just, because it can be really
Mhm.
difficult when you're trying to build a spiritual practice. So I'm really grateful. And I just love the fact that this book has so much to offer. I wanted to also ask, because I'm curious, how long did it take you to write this? Because I'm looking at it and there's a lot here. How many years did you spend working on this?
Um, that's a really funny question. So I it came together quite fast, honestly.
No way.
I no, it did. It did. Probably because I am an epic journaler. I journal every morning. I follow the artist's way. Have you ever heard
Yeah,
Julie Cameron's artist's way of doing the morning
yeah,
pages where you like
highly recommended.
free yeah, you like freehand write 3 pages every morning. I do that. I'm never going to be able to remember all the details later. So when I do trance journeys or I have some sort of dream communications, I will write it down. So I had a lot of this stuff in journals. So there was a lot of just transcribing that.
Yeah.
And um of course there was the trance journey pieces, because there are some lyrical pieces in there where I
Yes.
speak in Hades' voice. So I did to do the trance journeys and the research. When it actually came down from like the time Llewellyn gave me a contract and the time that I turned in a manuscript, my first draft was about 5 months of writing. So and that was a lot. My magic and being a priestess like is my profession right now. So I do have the advantage of not having a day job per se, because I'm self-employed. And, so other than teaching and appearing at conferences and other things, I was pretty much writing full time. And so it came together quite quickly. And, honestly, the thing that took the most time was tracking down and citing all of those primary sources, really. The rest of it, as far as like what to include in the book and what Hades had to say about it, there's a lot of things in here that have come from multiple years of teaching. I think I've been teaching for over a decade now, so a lot of it was just kind of pulling things from journals, pulling things from coursework, finding those resources to cite. So yeah, it surprised me too that it came together so fast.
Yeah, because that's impressive considering, it's really got a lot in there. It's no lightweight book. It's got a lot. Um,
Thank you.
this is a out of left field question, but I'm just curious. Have you ever seen any depiction of Hades you thought was good in a modern film or theater production?
Modern film or theater. Well, I was lucky enough to see Hadestown on Broadway. And even though Hades is, I wouldn't say he's a villain per se in that musical, but excuse me, he is kind of representative of the musical is sort of an allegory for some of the modern woes we have, like endemic poverty and climate change and all of those things. And Hades is kind of the sort of the is holding up that end of the story, right?
Yeah.
But I did like the portrayal of him as someone who got so involved in his work that he sort of lost his way, like he lost his way from where he started in the beginning, why he was doing it, and sort of it grew distant from his partner, grew distant from Persephone. I thought that they made him a bit more human, and he's usually portrayed as being stoic, and I liked that. I thought it was good. They did a really good. Anais Mitchell did a really good job with that. Let's see. There
Have
are,
you seen Jean Cocteau's Orphe?
I don't think I've seen that. I'll have to check that out.
You should Orphe in this one. It was made in the, I think, late 40s, early 50s, and it was an
Okay.
avant-garde production of the story of Orphe. And
Okay.
Hades was portrayed as a beautiful black-haired woman who's very regal. It's a
Mm.
very fascinating take on it. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'm totally gonna look that up after we get off this call.
How do you feel
Um,
about him being portrayed? People are going to think about James Wood's portrayal of
yes,
Hades. It's like that's going to
yeah.
stick in people's heads.
The James Wood is the voice actor behind Hades
Yeah,
in Disney's Hercules.
yeah,
For those who don't know who James Wood is,
yeah,
and that's the cartoon version where Hades has like blue fiery hair
yeah,
and speaks Yiddish occasionally.
yes,
Yeah, it's pretty far out. And also he's scheming against Olympus. And
yeah,
he that happens a lot in like comics or cartoons or things like that. And in reality, Hades has no interest whatsoever about
yeah,
what goes on Mount Olympus.
yeah. So I want to talk to you about a project that you're working on that is really big and very important. It is the Way of the Weaver project. Can you talk about
Yeah.
this a little bit?
Yeah. Well, Way of the Weaver actually was one of the beautiful things that Hades himself brought into my life. So the tie-in is my friend Murphy Robinson lives in Vermont, and at that Vermont witch camp, we did a lot of magical work together with Hades. And after camp, Murphy reached out and wanted to kind of keep the conversation going over email and kind of keep in touch. And about 3 years later, Murphy was like, I would really, really like it if you could come up to Vermont and maybe teach me and a couple of my friends some of the skills that I saw you using at camp because I really want to learn. I'm like, oh yeah, like we can totally do that. Let's work that out. And many, many conversations and a pandemic later, Way of the Weaver was born. And we called it Way of the Weaver because what we wanted to do was develop a program that combined magical study and inquiry with social justice work and also with community building. And we wanted to do it in a way that we almost were teaching magic like a open source skill set, like a technology or a toolkit that you could take. And then no matter who you are, if you were a skeptic, if you were a pagan, even if you're a Christian, we've had Christians in our classes, or anybody can kind of take these magical tools, take this little toolkit and use it use it in a way that will benefit their practice and their belief system. So that's kind of where this came from. And uh, unfortunately, the first year when I was going up to Vermont to teach classes, the pandemic hit, the COVID-19 pandemic, and so that had to be put on hold. And then Murphy and I kind of pivoted and started teaching online modules. We've taught several really amazing modules. They all last about 3 months. We've taught a module on spell work. We've taught a module that we call Divination for Liberation, which explores some different divinatory tools. We've taught a radical devotion class on how to have a radical and modern relationship with the gods. um, We've taught a class on death priestessing, which is a subject that's near and dear to my heart, of course, being a priestess of Hades. And Murphy is a hunter and also teaches hunting classes. So they also do a lot of things with, with giving animals a sacred death. So
Yeah,
um, you know, we've done programs on all kinds of things, and we've taught at this point. We've been able to get back to doing some things in person. In fact, we have a Weaver camp, a 4-day camp coming up in July. That's going to be fun.
nice.
And we've had over 200 people, 200 different people cycle through either one or more of the modules and learning programs that we've put out there. So we're really excited. It's a really great little community. We try to make it a place where it's very inclusive and people feel like it's a safer space for them to be. It's a very queer-centric space
Yeah,
and where we try to again work for the arc of justice in the world. So we try to halt microaggressions. We try to make sure we're avoiding or being sensitive to cultural appropriation and things like that. So it's a really unique program, and Hades kind of put Murphy and I together all those years ago. And, we don't focus on him because we want this to be, more of like an open source type of thing that people can use with their own belief system. But it's a nice gift. It was a nice gift. And yeah, like I said, we have a camp coming up this summer, and then next winter, and starting in January 2024, we'll be teaching the Death Priestessing module again. So yeah, you can check it out. We have a website, wayoftheweaver.com, and Murphy and I put out a podcast where it's basically just the two of us chatting back and forth and telling kooky stories about ourselves as baby pagans.
Oh, is that's going on now? You have that podcast now?
Yeah.
Oh my
We
God, I want to
just
listen to this. That sounds great.
we actually just 5 episodes in. We recorded the 5th episode this morning, so it's been a big podcasting day for me.
What is
And
that called?
yeah, it's just called Way of the Weaver. We just named it the same name as the program.
Oh,
And
yeah,
it's on
that's
all the
simple. Okay.
major, all the major apps have it. So wherever you like to catch your podcast, you can find it.
Well, listen
But
to that.
it's
I'll
a
put a link
really,
on the website too. I'll put a link in the bio so people can find that.
yeah, it's a beautiful group of people. Beautiful group of people, and all people who care about justice and just, want to be in spiritual community that doesn't have a lot of rules or expectations.
I mean, all the things you're talking about sound so important. I mean, I think that the dealing with microaggressions,
Hmm.
you know, we can say that simply, but it's such a huge thing, and it has been something that it is the crack that broke the dam of many pagan communities I've seen, like especially here in the Bay Area, and just like also, so many things like learning to deal with different members of the LGBT community. You think that would be a given in the pagan communities, but in many cases it hasn't. And many times people don't know how to react or interact. And there's been so many things here. Was this kind of born of like some stuff that you've seen in different pagan communities where you thought this is something that needs to be addressed? Because I think finally people are starting to do things like this now where they're seeing how pagan communities have been falling because of all the strife from people not getting along and not knowing how to talk to each other. Did this come from a place of, where you guys saw this and wanted to kind of fix the issue?
Well, it came from a place of, yeah, I mean, Murphy has been a pagan and a magical practitioner almost as long as I have. Murphy's a bit younger than I am, but both of us have been doing this for, over 2 decades. And Murphy had gone to a lot of reclaiming events. The reclaiming community is very well known for their activism. And of course,
Yeah.
I kind of came in from a different way. I kind of came in from Sisterhood of Avalon, which I was always really proud about. The SOA was one of the very first organizations that decided, and it was a women's organization, but I was on the board of trustees actually when we made the decision to allow anyone who identified as a woman to join. I mean, we didn't ask, we didn't clarify, we just, if you identify as a woman, you're welcome here. So I was, but, that all came right before some of the things you were talking about. I used to go to a women's festival in Pennsylvania every year, and I started going in 2005, and this was probably about I want to say 2015, 2016. I had gotten to the point where I was not only presenting, I was sometimes facilitating the large, like all camp rituals, and I was working on the staff, and I was like really, really engaged and involved with this festival. But unfortunately, the festival producer, the producer decided that this was going to be a space for only those who were assigned female at birth. So something that had been part of my it was like a yearly family reunion, honestly. It was such a huge part of my spirituality, but I had to walk away when that decision was made because that's not, that's not my, that's not in line with my ethics and morals and my code of honor. So,
Yeah, mine either.
yeah, so I had to walk away, and that was such a huge loss. It was a huge, huge loss in my life. And when we started creating Way of the Weaver, Murphy and I had several long discussions about things that were important to us and in setting up group culture, right? I mean, we sit down and we make group agreements every time that we start a class or a module or the camp or anything. The very first things we do is we introduce ourselves. We all put an item on the altar, and then we all sit and make group agreements about how to be in the space together. And of course, Murphy and I facilitate it, but it's a group consensus discussion. And it's not always easy, but it's worth it, because people get a chance to feel like they are actively participating and consenting to what's happening, which consent is a huge, huge problem sometimes in pagan spaces. And it kind of sets the tone, so that we know how to treat each other. And we have protocols for, if a microaggression occurs, or if somebody, forgets to ask consent before, touching someone on the shoulder or hugging them or something. We have protocols that are safe and gentle, where we gently correct each other. And then we do what the little kids do. We do a do-over. We just call a do-over. And
Yeah.
and everybody gets a chance to practice it again. And it's great. It's really great. And those things are so this is so important to the program. So not only do we, I mean, I consider all those things to fall under the justice piece of what we're doing. There's like the magical inquiry piece, there's the community piece, and this is all part of the justice piece.
I mean, what you're doing is so important. I really, encourage people to look into this. I'll put the link in the bio, because this kind of work is so fundamental to pagan communities, and really needs to be kind of brought to the front, and people need to be doing this more, because we can't avoid this stuff anymore. We have to be working together for positive ends. Jamie, I want to thank you for being on the podcast. I've really enjoyed getting to talk to you, and I can't wish you enough success for your new book, but I don't think you're going to need it. It's pretty amazing, and I think people are going to
Thank
love
you.
it.
Oh, thank you. Well, it will, the print release is scheduled for February 2024. If you're interested in checking out the cover and what the publisher has to say about it, and a few of the early editorial reviews, all that stuff is up on the Llewellyn website. And I think you can
Very
even
nice.
pre-order it if you want to.
Okay, I'll put up a link for that too. Jamie, thanks for being on the podcast. I really enjoyed getting a chance to talk to you. That was my conversation with author Jamie Waggoner. Her forthcoming book, Hades, Myth, Magic, and Modern Devotion, will be out in February of 2024. We have links to the programs and publications mentioned in this episode in the bio. Next week, we'll be talking to Linda Redditch, the author of A Secret History of Christmas Baking, Recipes and Stories from Tomb Offerings to Gingerbread Boys. She is also author of Old Elfland, Secrets of the Bronze Age to Middle-earth. You'll be hearing my conversation with her next week in Season 2. Until then, have a blessed week.